This story follows Mia, a young adventurer with a thirst for the untamed, as she ventures deep into the heart of the outback. But what begins as an exciting journey soon turns into a nightmarish struggle for survival. As she encounters a mysterious stranger and unravels the dark secrets of the land, Mia's reality twists into something far more terrifying than she ever imagined.
The air felt thick with unease as the orange sun dipped below the horizon, painting the vast Australian outback in hues of crimson and shadow. My heart raced, not just from the thrill of adventure, but from something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. It was the kind of feeling you get when you're being watched, but when you turn around, there's nothing but empty wilderness staring back at you. I was miles from the nearest town, my feet sore from hours of walking under the relentless sun. The last traces of daylight clung to the sky, but night was closing in fast. I needed to find a place to camp soon, or risk wandering in the dark. The idea of pitching my tent alone in this desolate expanse sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed the fear aside. I was here for an adventure, and the outback was as raw and untamed as it gets. A rumble in the distance made me stop in my tracks. The sound grew louder, and soon, I could make out the faint glow of headlights approaching from behind. Relief washed over me as a battered old pickup truck came into view. I waved my hand, and the truck slowed to a stop beside me. The driver, a man in his late 30s with a weathered face and a friendly smile, leaned out the window. "Need a lift?" He asked, his voice carrying a thick Australian accent. I hesitated. The stories I had heard from fellow travelers flashed through my mind, tales of a dark figure known as the backpacker, who roamed the outback in search of unsuspecting victims. But those were just stories, right? Urban legends meant to spook gullible tourists like me. I forced a smile. Yeah, that would be great. Thanks." The man reached across to unlock the passenger door, and I climbed in. The interior smelled of dust and old leather, but it was better than spending the night alone on the road. As we drove, the man introduced himself as Jack and asked about my travels. I told him I was exploring the outback, soaking in the beauty of the land. He nodded, a glint of something I couldn't quite identify flashing in his eyes. We drove in silence for a while, the landscape outside the window growing darker by the minute. The road seemed endless, stretching out into the void, with no signs of civilization in sight. A growing unease gnawed at me, but I brushed it off. Jack seemed friendly enough, and besides, I had no other options. So Mia," he said suddenly, breaking the silence, "ever heard of the backpacker?" My heart skipped a beat. The name hung in the air like a bad omen, and I struggled to keep my voice steady. Yeah, I've heard a few stories. Just urban legends, though. Nothing to worry about, right?" Jack chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. Oh, they're just stories, sure. But there's always a bit of truth in every legend, wouldn't you say?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I tried to laugh, but it came out forced. I guess so." We drove on, the conversation fading into an uncomfortable silence. My eyes were drawn to the backpack lying in the backseat, its bulky shape outlined in the dim light. Something about it didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I tore my gaze away and stared out the window, watching as the landscape blurred into darkness. Hours seemed to pass, the road winding deeper into the wilderness. I began to wonder if Jack even knew where he was going. The thought of being stranded out here, alone with a stranger, made my skin prickle with fear. Suddenly, the truck sputtered and slowed to a stop. Jack cursed under his breath and turned the key, but the engine refused to start. He smacked the steering wheel in frustration. A damn thing. Must be out of gas. My pulse quickened. What do we do now? Jack turned to me, his smile now a cold, calculating grin. Looks like we'll have to spend the night here. Don't worry, Mia. I'll take good care of you. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled with the door handle, my fingers trembling. But before I could get out, Jack's hand shot out, gripping my arm with an ironclad hold. His friendly demeanor had vanished, replaced by something far more sinister. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Let go of me," I shouted, my voice trembling. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my ear. You really shouldn't trust strangers, Mia." With a burst of adrenaline, I wrenched my arm free and threw myself out of the truck. I hit the ground hard, the impact jarring, but I scrambled to my feet and ran into the darkness. The night was thick and suffocating, the only sounds my ragged breaths and the pounding of my heart. I could hear Jack calling after me, his voice laced with mockery. You can run, Mia, but you can't hide." I didn't stop running, even as the darkness closed in around me, swallowing me whole. The only thing driving me forward was the primal instinct to survive. But the outback was vast and unforgiving, and I had no idea where I was going. Hours seemed to stretch into an eternity as I stumbled through the wilderness, my legs growing weaker with every step. I was lost, disoriented, with no sense of direction. The fear that had been simmering inside me now boiled over, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. But I couldn't stop, not when Jack was still out there hunting me. Finally, exhaustion got the better of me, and I collapsed against a tree, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making you feel like the world has been emptied of life. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to stay warm, trying to stay awake. But as the minutes ticked by, sleep began to creep in, my eyelids growing heavier. I fought it, knowing that falling asleep out here would mean the end, but my body was betraying me. The darkness seemed to close in tighter, the trees looming over me like silent sentinels. Just as I was about to succumb to the exhaustion, I heard a sound, a faint rustling, followed by footsteps. My heart leaped into my throat, and I forced my eyes open, straining to see through the inky blackness. There, standing just a few feet away, was a figure. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the outline of a backpack slung over their shoulder. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure stepped closer, and the faint moonlight glinted off something metallic in their hand. My blood turned to ice as I realized what it was, a knife, the blade catching the light with a cold gleam. Mia, the voice was low, almost a whisper. You should have stayed in the truck." In that moment, everything around me seemed to blur, reality twisting into something unrecognizable. My mind raced, searching for a way out, for anything that could save me. But there was no escape, no way to outrun the inevitable. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end. But instead of the sharp pain I was expecting, there was nothing. Only silence, thick and suffocating. Slowly, I opened my eyes, expecting to see Jack standing over me, but he was gone. The figure was gone. I was alone, or at least it seemed that way. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it been real? Or was it just a nightmare, born from the terror that had gripped me so tightly? My backpack was gone. The one I had clung to throughout my journey, containing my essentials, was nowhere to be found. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched the ground around me. How could it have disappeared so quickly? I stumbled back to the spot where I had collapsed, hoping to find a clue. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced with the memory of Jack's sinister smile. What had he done? And where was my backpack? As I scanned the ground, something glinted in the faint light of dawn. It was a small, silver keychain, a tiny kangaroo, the one I had bought as a souvenir. I picked it up with trembling fingers, my mind struggling to piece together what was happening. Why would he take my backpack and leave this behind? Then I heard it, a soft rustling in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My blood ran cold. Jack was still out there, hunting me. But this time, He wasn't alone. I froze, barely daring to breathe, as two shadowy figures emerged from the trees. They moved with a quiet confidence, their eyes scanning the area until they landed on me. My heart nearly stopped when I saw what they were carrying: my backpack. The taller of the two figures stepped forward, holding the backpack out in front of him as if offering it to me. But his expression was anything but kind. His face was hardened, his eyes cold and calculating. The other figure, a woman, remained slightly behind him, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. What's this?" The man asked, his voice low and dangerous. You drop something?" I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs refused to move. Instead, I found myself shaking my head, unable to form words. The man smirked, his gaze shifting to the keychain in my hand. Looks like you've been busy," he said, stepping closer. But you really shouldn't have taken something that doesn't belong to you." My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. What did he mean? I hadn't taken anything, at least, not knowingly. But as the man moved even closer, a horrifying thought began to take shape in my mind. These weren't just random travelers. They were connected to Jack, part of some twisted group that preyed on people like me. And they were here to collect what they believed was theirs. The woman finally spoke, her voice cold and emotionless. You should have stayed on the main road. People who wander off the beaten path tend to disappear." The implication behind her words hit me like a punch to the gut. All the stories I had heard, the warnings from other travelers, they weren't just stories. They were real, and I was living one of them. My grip tightened around the keychain as I realized there was no escape. These people, whoever they were, had been watching me from the start, manipulating my journey, leading me into this trap. And now, they had no intention of letting me go. The man tossed my backpack at my feet, his smirk widening. Go on, take it. You're gonna need it where you're going." I hesitated, but the look in his eyes told me I had no choice. I bent down slowly, reaching for the backpack, my mind racing with desperate plans of escape. But before I could even touch the bag, the woman lunged forward, grabbing my wrist in an iron grip. You're coming with us," as she hissed, pulling me to my feet with terrifying strength. "And no more running." Panic surged through me as I struggled against her hold, but the man was already behind me, his hand on my shoulder, forcing me to move. They led me deeper into the forest, the dense trees swallowing us whole. My mind screamed for a way out, but there was none. As we walked, the reality of my situation settled in like a suffocating blanket. I was trapped, surrounded by people who had no intention of letting me go. Whatever they had planned for me, it wasn't going to end well. Suddenly, a thought struck me, something Jack had said earlier when we were still driving. You can run, Mia, but you can't hide." Had this all been part of their sick game? A test to see how far I could go before they caught me? The realization sent a cold chill down my spine. Finally, we reached a small clearing where a rusted old van was parked. The woman opened the back door and shoved me inside, locking it behind me. I banged on the door, screaming for help, but the only response was the sound of the van's engine starting. As the van began to move, I collapsed against the cold metal floor, tears streaming down my face. I had been so naive, so eager for adventure, that I had walked straight into their trap. And now, I was paying the price. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm me, a tiny spark of defiance remained. I wasn't going to let them break me. Not yet. Somehow, I would find a way out. I had to. The van rumbled on, taking me deeper into the unknown, away from everything familiar. The outback was vast, but it wasn't endless. Eventually, we would stop. And when we did, I would be ready. As the first light of dawn broke through the small windows of the van, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what it took, I would survive. I would find my way back. And when I did, I would make sure the world knew what had happened out here. For now, though, all I could do was wait. Wait for the moment when I could fight back.
The legend of the backpacker is not just a tale to thrill and terrify. It's a stark warning about trust, survival, and the thin line between reality and horror. If you want to watch another story, we've selected this video about hospital horror stories, and it's appearing on your screen now. Remember to subscribe.